My name is Rosalie Dean, and I am 23 years old. I was 2 semesters away from my nursing degree when my family sat me down at the dinner table and told me my education was over, not because the money had run out, not because of any emergency, but because I had refused to apologize to my brother for something I did not do. That night started like any other Sunday dinner at our house. Mom had made pot roast. Dad was at the head of the table, cutting his meat with that slow, deliberate patience he always performed when he was about to say something he had rehearsed. My brother Caleb, 26, sat across from me with his arms crossed and his eyes fixed on his plate. He wouldn't look at me. He hadn't looked at me properly in 3 weeks, not since the incident at his workplace that had somehow, in the retelling, become entirely my fault. 3 weeks earlier, Caleb had been passed over for a promotion at the engineering firm where he worked. He had blamed it on a conversation I had with his colleague Marcus at a family barbecue, where I had casually mentioned that Caleb sometimes struggled to take criticism. I wasn't being malicious. Marcus had asked me what Caleb was like growing up, and I had answered honestly. But in Caleb's mind, I had sabotaged him. In my parents' minds, I had committed an act close to betrayal. And for 3 weeks, the atmosphere in that house had been a slow, quiet storm building pressure behind every closed door. So that Sunday, when Dad put his fork down and folded his hands, I already knew something was coming. I just didn't know how far it would reach. He said it plainly. He said that as long as I was living under their roof and accepting their financial support for my education, I was a representative of this family, and representatives of this family did not go around undermining their siblings to strangers. He said Caleb deserved an apology, a real one, not the half-hearted sorry I had offered 2 weeks before. He said if I couldn't bring myself to do that, then they would be pausing their contributions to my tuition until I could demonstrate that I understood the seriousness of what I had done. My mother didn't say anything. She just kept her eyes on her plate and reached over to refill Caleb's water glass, which told me everything I needed to know about where she stood. I sat there for a moment and felt something shift inside me. Not anger exactly, something quieter than anger. Something that felt like a door closing. I had spent 23 years watching my parents treat Caleb like the sun around which our entire family orbited. Every school play where his performance was louder than mine. Every holiday where his preferences determined the menu and the location. Every argument where his version of events was the version that survived. I had accepted all of it because I loved my family and because I had always believed that love required accommodation. But sitting there that night, being told that my education, my future, 2 years of sacrifice and student work and 5 a.m. study sessions would be held hostage until I bent the knee to a man who had never once been held accountable for anything, I felt that accommodation reached its absolute limit. I looked at my dad. I looked at Caleb. And I said one word. All right. Not all right, I'll apologize. Not all right, you've made your point. Just all right. Like a period at the end of a sentence that had been going on for far too long. My dad nodded like he had won something. My mom exhaled. Caleb finally looked up at me, and I held his gaze for just a second before I pushed back my chair, folded my napkin onto the table, and walked upstairs. I did not sleep that night. By 10 o'clock I had pulled 2 suitcases from the top of my closet. By midnight those suitcases were full. I moved quietly and methodically clothes, documents, my nursing textbooks, the small locked box where I kept my savings passbook and my grandmother's ring. I had a friend named Dara who had been offering me her spare room for 6 months, every time she sensed that things at home were getting worse. I texted her at 12:47 in the morning. She replied in under 2 minutes. She just said, "I'll leave the key under the mat." By 4 a.m. my car was loaded. I sat in the driver's seat in the dark driveway and looked at the house where I had grown up, the porch light my mother always left on, the basketball hoop Caleb had begged for at 14 and used twice, the rose bushes my grandmother had planted along the front walk. I didn't feel the sentimental collapse I had always imagined I would feel leaving a place like that. I felt clear. Frighteningly, completely clear. I drove to Dara's. I slept 4 hours. I woke up, made coffee, and started researching emergency financial aid options for my final 2 semesters. There were more than I expected. I also had a part-time job at a medical clinic that I had kept quiet from my parents because they had always framed it as unnecessary. We take care of you. Why do you need to work? That job, it turned out, was the thing that would hold me together. My phone started ringing around 8 in the morning. Mom first, then Dad. I let them go to voicemail and kept typing. What I did not expect, what I had not planned for and had not anticipated in any version of the conversation I had rehearsed in my head on the drive over, was the message Caleb sent me at 8:43 a.m. It was 4 words. Please tell me you didn't. No context. No explanation of what he thought I had done or sent or said. Just that raw, pale panic compressed into a text message from a man who had spent 3 weeks acting like he held every card at that table. I stared at it. And then I heard my phone ring again. This time it was Dad, and when I finally picked up, his voice had lost the measured authority it always carried at dinner. He sounded like a man who had just walked into a room expecting furniture and found bare floors. He said, "Rosalie, send what? What did you send?" And that was the moment I realized that whatever Caleb was afraid I had done, I hadn't done it yet. I want you to understand something before I tell you what happened next. I had not sent anything. I had not made any calls, written any emails, or contacted anyone at Caleb's company. I had simply packed my bags and left. Whatever Caleb believed I had done, whatever had drained the color from his face and pushed him to send that panicked forward message before 9 in the morning, existed entirely inside his own guilt. And that guilt, it turned out, was carrying a lot more weight than I had ever known. When my dad asked me on the phone what I had sent, I told him the truth. I said I hadn't sent anything. I said I had packed my room, loaded my car, and left while they were sleeping. I said I was safe, I was at a friend's place, and I would be in touch when I was ready. He went quiet for a long moment, the kind of quiet that isn't peaceful, the kind that comes right before something breaks, and then he said he needed to call me back. He hung up before I could respond. I sat at Dara's kitchen table with my coffee going cold and my phone face up in front of me, and I waited. Dara didn't ask questions. She just put a plate of toast in front of me and sat across from me reading a book like it was any ordinary morning, and I loved her for that more than I could say. The callback came 40 minutes later. It wasn't my dad. It was my mother, and she was crying, not the soft, careful tears she used when she wanted to manage a situation, but real crying, unguarded and a little frightening. She said that after my father had gotten off the phone with me, he had gone to find Caleb to tell him I hadn't sent anything. And Caleb had not looked relieved. Caleb had looked worse. Because my father, for the first time in as long as I could remember, had looked at his son's face and asked the question he had apparently been avoiding for years. He asked Caleb what, exactly, he had been afraid I'd sent. And Caleb, alone in a room with a father who was no longer nodding and validating and smoothing things over, had not been able to hold the story together. What came out in pieces, haltingly, the way things come out when someone has been keeping them down through pure force of performance, was this: Caleb had not been passed over for the promotion because of anything I said at that barbecue. He had been passed over because of a formal complaint filed against him by 2 junior colleagues who said he had taken credit for their project work on 3 separate occasions and had spoken to them in ways that made the work environment hostile. The complaint was documented. HR had records. And Caleb, rather than face that at home, had constructed a version of events where I was the villain, where my one casual, honest sentence to Marcus had been the thing that derailed his career. He had fed that version to my parents, and my parents, who had spent decades finding it easier to believe in Caleb's version of any story, had accepted it completely. They had used it to pressure me, threaten my education, and sit at that dinner table with the full weight of parental authority behind a lie. My mother told me all of this in a voice that kept breaking. She said she hadn't known. I believed her, and I also knew that not knowing had required a great deal of practiced effort on her part. She said my father was downstairs, and that he wasn't speaking, and that Caleb had gone to his room and closed the door. She said the house felt different. I didn't say anything to that because I wasn't sure what comfort I could honestly offer. What I did say was that I needed time. I said I wasn't ready to come home, and that I wasn't sure, yet, whether home was even the right word for that place any more. I said that what had happened at that dinner table wasn't an accident or a misunderstanding. My education had been used as a weapon. My future had been made conditional on my silence and my submission. Even if Caleb had been telling the truth about everything, that would have been wrong. And now that it was clear he hadn't been telling the truth about anything, I needed space to figure out what kind of relationship, if any, I wanted with people who had been so willing to believe the worst of me. My mother said she understood. I think she meant it. The weeks that followed were hard in the practical, unglamorous way that real life is hard. I filed for emergency financial aid and got a partial grant that covered most of my remaining tuition. My clinic job picked up an extra shift. Dara charged me nothing for the room and told me to pay her back someday by buying her dinner when I was a nurse making real money. I studied harder than I ever had because I had something to prove, not to my parents, not to Caleb, but to the version of myself that had almost let a dinner table conversation become the end of everything. My dad called me 2 weeks later. Not to explain or defend, just to say that he had been wrong, that he had let his vision of Caleb crowd out his fairness to me for a long time, and that he was sorry. It was the most direct apology he had ever given me. It didn't fix everything, but it was real, and I held on to it. Caleb and I have not spoken since. That may change someday. It may not. I've stopped deciding in advance what forgiveness has to look like or what timeline it has to follow. What I know is that I am 4 weeks from finishing my degree. I have an apartment that is mine. I wake up in the morning without dread. And the last thing I carried out of that house before I drove away in the dark, that small locked box with my savings and my grandmother's ring, sits on my desk every single day and reminds me that I knew, even at 4 a.m. in a dark driveway, exactly who I was. That's the part no one can threaten to cut off. Not ever. If this story stayed with you, if you've ever been the one at the table who was asked to be smaller so someone else could feel bigger, then you already know why these stories matter. Subscribe to this channel and hit the bell so you never miss a new one.